So if you're I'm going to approach this like you're brand new to it. So I really am going to kind of walk through everything from the very beginning and assume that you know nothing about it. So I hope that I don't insult anybody's intelligence by getting kind of down into the basics, but that's the frame of reference where we're going to start today. So we're going to go through the process of water bath canning. There are two basic methods of canning. One is water bath and one is pressure canning. The one we're going to talk about today is water bath, but I want you to understand the difference between the two. And, you know, please don't worry about taking notes today, unless it's super helpful for you. I have a Google Docs link that I'm going to ask Carolyn to put up in the chat a little later. I've got some websites, some really good resources pages to point you to that you'll have access to later on. But I think it's more helpful to just kind of watch what's going on and kind of absorb it, and then you'll have some reference pieces later, so you don't have to madly scribble notes today. And again, Carolyn said if you have a question, throw it in the chat to her. Carolyn will pop in periodically if there's a question about what I'm doing specifically at the moment, but we should have plenty of time to go through some questions as we go along. So first of all, what does canning or processing do? That you'll hear those two terms interchangeably, the processing or canning. The process means that you take a fragile, fresh product and put it through a process so that it can be shelf stable. And the process does two things. It heats the contents of your jar to the point where it's killed off any kind of microorganisms that might have been in the jar or in the produce that you're putting into it, but it kills off any of that bacteria. And it also forms a vacuum seal. So the contents of the jar will swell a little bit as they heat up. They'll push the air out, and then as they contract, that lid will kind of suck down and form that vacuum seal, so nothing is going to get in there. So it's a process, two-pronged, killing bacteria and creating that vacuum seal. So there, as I mentioned, the two processes are water bath canning and pressure canning. Now, water bath and what you're putting in the jar determines which of those processes you need to use. Water bath canning is intended for high acid foods, pickles, jams, jellies, acidified tomatoes, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But anything with an acid content that's high enough to be safely canned by processing in a water bath canner. Now that water bath, you're going to be putting things in a jar and getting a lid on it and putting it into boiling water for a prescribed period of time. That temperature is never going to get above 212 degrees, the temperature of boiling water. So there are low acid foods that will never be safely processed at 212 degrees. They need to be processed at a higher temperature. And that's where the pressure canner can come in. The pressure canner can get that internal temperature up to 230, 240, I forget what it is, but there are things like corn, lima beans, green beans, an assortment of different kinds of, most vegetables will need to be pressure canned. And pressure canning is like the next level. I wouldn't advise anybody to jump in to learn canning starting out with a pressure canner. I would advise people, if you wanted to start out with something safe. And the is simpler to do, requires much more limited equipment. And then if you decide that you want to stay with it and learn and broaden your canning horizons and can different things, you can get into pressure canning, but it's not necessary. So how do you know what the acid level of your product is? Well, I'm going to tell you a couple of sources, and we'll put that in the chat later. There are a couple of really, really good, reliable, trusted sources that you can look at for, you know, which foods can be safely processed this way. There are a gazillion different blogs on the internet, recipe sites that will, you know, will show you these beautiful pictures of these lovely jams and jellies and salsas or whatever. But whoever has written that has not tested those recipes. I would advise strongly against canning anything from a recipe that you've found online that's not a legitimate science-based, fact-based, research-based source. And I can't say that strongly enough. There are 3 primary sources that I would recommend for both process and recipes. First one is Ball, the Jarden brands or Ball canning, you know, the folks that make Ball canning jars. Their site is quite commercial. They have a lot of things on there that they would like to really sell you, but they have backed it up with research and testing, and you can take those recipes to the bank as far as being safe to can at home. The other 2 sites that I would recommend, one is the Virginia Cooperative Extension Service. They don't have many recipes online, but they will definitely give you the process guidelines that you can rest assured are safe. The third one is the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And that is a site that's operated by the University of Georgia. It's not as pretty as the Ball site, but it's absolutely as solid. And there's some recipes on there, lots of guidelines. There's a lot of information in there that you can noodle around in. And I would say of those 3 places, I tend to go to Ball first, but any of those sources, and we'll provide some links in that document. One of the things that I will show you, this is what's considered the canning Bible. Is it mirrored? Is it flipped? Yeah. This is the Ball Blue Book. It's kind of the canner's Bible. And they don't come out with a new edition every year, but they do revise it on a regular basis. And I will tell you, this one is from 1981. It's vintage. I'm not cooking out of this. It's got lots of recipes in it, but a lot of these formulations have changed. In the late 80s, early 90s, the USDA and the FDA did a whole lot of revisions about what was safe to do in home canning. So I keep this for sentimental value, but it's not a reference book for me. This one is the 2011 edition, and it's not even the most current one, but there's very few differences between this and I think the most recent one was 2016. So I'll probably invest in a new one in another couple of years, but got lots of information, lots of recipes, lots of, you know, cool ideas. So again, it's the Ball Company, and they stand behind it. So, and botulism is nothing to play with. So, you know, we want to be sure that things are done safely. I always hear when I teach a class, people say, well, you know, my mother used to do this, or my grandmother used to do that, and she's still alive, or nobody died. And I'm thinking, you know, that's not the highest praise I want to hear. You know, I'm going to show you the safe way to do things and recognize that a lot of things have changed through the years. Science has gotten better at testing things. Manufacturing processes have changed some. So the people that are doing this research their prime reason is to make sure that things are done safely. So please take that to heart. So let's talk a little bit about, gotta get my notes in front of me. Let's talk a little bit about what supplies you might need, and what recipes, what kinds of things you might want to can. So if you have a garden and things are, you know, growing, you got more cucumbers than you know what to do with, your tomatoes are, you know, prolific, and all these, you know, all these things coming out of your garden. Well, it's a good, canning is a good way to preserve those things so that you don't have to eat them all in August. You can save them, you know, have them preserved through the winter. Again, a lot of vegetables that you might have in your garden, you're not going to be able to do in the water bath canning per se. You might, if you want to do like a pickled corn relish or pickled cucumbers, because those are high enough acid, they're safe to go in here. But there's not just your garden, you know, the farmers markets, growers all over the place. When produce starts coming in, it's in prime shape, it's ready, you know, take advantage of it. You can put what you want in that jar. If you have allergies or health situations that you want to accommodate, you know, low salt, things like that, it's the ideal opportunity to make sure that you have control over what's going into that jar. I have today, I'm going to show you what we're going to work on today. I bought a box of canning grade tomatoes from a local grower. And canning grade tomatoes, you know, they're not rotten. And these started off, well, I'll show you, I've got one here. This is one I did not cut. But I mean, there's a little bruisey spot there and a split, but that's it. I mean, otherwise it's a beautiful tomato. Now, because of that little split, it's not going to stay. You see my dog? He's nervous with the thunder. Sorry. It's not going to stay. It's not going to keep very long. This is going to diminish its shelf life. I've got these from the Barracks Road farm market, just out on Barracks Road. A box of 20 pounds was $20. So 95% of that tomato is just fine. So it's a really good deal. You can find the same thing with peaches or any other produce. And I might recommend if you, farmers markets, a lot of times at the end of the day might have a box of tomatoes as they've been sorting through, and customers they pick this up and say, oh no, I want a perfect one. And they set that off to the side. You might find at the end of the day, you'd have a great deal on tomatoes. So I would strongly recommend making a phone call or talking with a grower to purchase some so that they don't go to waste. So with tomatoes in particular, there are a lot of different ways to process them. I'm going to show you what I think is like the easiest thing to do. I want to, in August, on a day when it's hot like this, I just want to get them in jars. I just want to get them in jars. I'm not going to make fancy salsa or sauce or simmer it for hours or any of that stuff. You know, I want them in jars. And in February, I'm going to fool around with the rest of it. I'm going to either puree them or dice them up nice and small or whatever. I'm just going to get them into jars today. That's my goal. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's helpful for you to understand what your household or what your family might use. Now, I'm going to can these tomatoes with, they have not been peeled, they have not been seeded. I buy them from a grower that I know uses no spray. I've washed them beforehand. I'm not, you know, overly concerned about you know, residual pesticides or anything like that. You know, they are farm grown, wholesome tomatoes. Don't get my house that is, you know, skeezy about having a piece of tomato peel in their spaghetti sauce. So for me, this works really well. But if you're doing tomatoes for maybe a couple of picky preschoolers that might, well, I don't know what that is, you might want to rethink this method, or you know, choose a different method that kind of extracts those those seeds, you might want to peel them ahead of time. You might want to process them differently. For me, I am all about, get it into jars. And when I'm making, chili or soups and stews, I have a jar of tomatoes ready to dump in. The other thing is you need to understand what it is your family is likely going to use. There is no reason in the world for you to knock yourself out in August to can 30 quarts of tomatoes, and next July you still have 26 of them on the shelf. If realistically, if you're not going to use them, it's a little wasted effort. If you decide to do it year to year, it's a good idea to keep kind of a journal where you made some notes. Okay, well, I made it, I put up 12 quarts of tomatoes. I really would have preferred pints because that would have been more useful for me. Or, I used them all up before November was out. So yeah, I'd like to make more next year. We weren't so hot on that pickle. You just don't make a lot of work for yourself that your family is not going to consume. So, I'll stop preaching about that. The other thing is, when you get produce, understand that the fruit, the vegetables that you can need to be in good condition. Now, I will go through and trim out some bad spots on, peaches or tomatoes, but the 90% of that fruit is perfectly fine. It's nice and ripe. It's sound. It doesn't have, weirdness on it or, but nothing is going to improve by being in a jar and being boiled for 30 minutes or whatever. So start with the best quality produce that you can, the closest to ripe and not overripe, and you'll be good. I want to make sure that you follow instructions. You'll see some general instructions today for canning tomatoes, but if you're doing a jam or a relish recipe, you want to be sure that you're measuring those quantities, those ingredients carefully. And it's for two reasons. One is that you want to be sure that your end product is palatable, that your jam sets, that it solidifies nicely, that it tastes good. But you also want to be sure that that tested recipe that you're using, if you start freewheeling it and throwing things in and not measuring it, you have likely upset that acidity balance, and it's no longer safe to be processed in a water bath canner. So pay attention to recipes. This is not necessarily a freewheeling time. I generally recommend, if you're making jam or jelly, to not double a recipe. That's when you start getting into really tricky territory with whether or not it's going to be ice cream sundae topping or actually jam. There's sometimes those things just don't work out to double. Okay. Any questions before? I'm going to listen out, but I'm going to wash my hands real quick before I get started here.
So if anybody has any questions, they want to put them in the chat.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the equipment that you need. So I'm going to start out by talking about jars. So you need, obviously, canning jars. Canning jars are not like reused spaghetti sauce jars or mayonnaise jars, whatever. They are produced as a canning jar. You want to treat them carefully. You can reuse them year to year. I use them all the time, but I also treat them fairly carefully. I don't bash them around. Believe it or not, glass can be bruised and not really, you can't really tell that it's got a defect or a minor bruise there, and then it gets a little bit hot, or you knock it the wrong way and you've broken it. So, they're glass, treat them like carefully. Canning jars come in lots of different sizes and shapes. So, and I've got a couple of things in the dishwasher, but This one is a pint jar. We're going to go into, we're going to put tomatoes in wide mouth pints. Your jars will come either as, this is a narrow or regular. They call this a regular mouth. This one is wide. I really like wide mouth jars, and I'll show you why when we get into this, but you know, I use some of both. So the jars are reusable. When you buy a case of jars, nowadays you buy a case of jars and they come with a lid and a ring. This lid has a little sealing compound around the edge that makes contact with the glass, is held in place with the band, and while it's heated in the canner, it does that, expand, forces the air out, and the lid will be sucked down into place to form that vacuum seal. Also reusable, these canning rings. Until they get rusty and ugly, you know, at which point I put them in recycling, but they are, you know, you can use them over and over again. The lids are one-time use, one time. I have friends that will sometimes use, yeah, we'll talk about how tight to make that in just a minute. I have friends sometimes that will use these, you know, they'll open a jar and then they go to store it in the fridge. You know, with that, you can store them just like that in the refrigerator. Once you have broken that seal, it's no longer shelf stable, so it needs to be kept in the refrigerator. I have some plastic screw-on lids that I like to use so much better in the fridge for storage, but you know, this will work. If these lids are in the refrigerator for any period of time, they're going to start, especially with jams or pickles, they're going to start getting icky looking. So that's why I like the plastic lids better. If you should get your jars out and they don't seal properly, and we'll talk about what that's going to look like. If they haven't sealed properly, it doesn't mean that what's in here is no good. It means that you can't put it on the shelf and come back to it months later. It is not shelf stable. So, you know, your choices are, you could reprocess it. I have very limited success with reprocessing a jar. And I don't want to cook something, you know, that much. Every now and then I'll have a jar that doesn't seal and I'll put it in the refrigerator and we use it within the next few days. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing at all. But it's not going to be, you know, don't put it back on your shelf because it's going to start molding. It's not been sealed properly. On your jar, and all of these threads are universal from jar to jar. A recipe will tell you to leave a certain amount of headspace. What that means is it wants you to leave vacant space between the product that you're canning and the lid. And usually that first thread there is where you want to fill it to with product there. And there will be that extra headspace, air gap there. If you overfill these and have these all the way up to the top, you're going to have product oozing out. You may not have a proper seal. You know, it needs that extra space in order to let the product expand a little bit, and then it contracts. And when you pull them out of the canner, you'll still see that air gap there. A couple of other things that you'll need equipment-wise. I would totally recommend a jar lifter. You're going to be moving hot jars in and out of hot water, and you don't know how hot is until you start fumbling with a jar. And you could try to maneuver it with just a pair of it's a recipe for disaster. These tongs are pretty inexpensive, and you can see they fit right around securely around the top of the jar and let you transport them around easily. So well worth, you know, I don't know, $4 or $5 or whatever they cost. These are a little bit more heavy duty than some I've seen, but you know, they're really a lifesaver. Canner. So you're going to need to be able to put jars, to submerge them in boiling water and have them covered by at least an inch. So if you're doing cute little jelly jars, this will work. It's going to be covered. Even you know, maybe a larger stock pot will work. I had a big aluminum canner that I used to use on the stovetop, and it was a relic. It was aluminum. It was a little dented. It still worked, but not terribly heat efficient. And I worried about the lifetime of my stove by, you know, having that on the stovetop. So this year, I'm going to show you the thing that I got this year, which I'm like tickled to death with. But let's see, can you see? This is an electric water bath canner, and it has a heating base on it. It's freestanding, so I've just got it plugged in here to the island. It's off the stove, which is really nice, because you know, you don't want to be juggling all kinds of pots there. But it's a very handy piece of equipment. It wasn't inexpensive, but you don't need it. I can justify it because of the amount of canning that I do, and I felt like it was, you know, good for to give my stove a bit of a break. And because it's all self-contained, on a day like today, I could put it out on the porch and not heat up the kitchen. It's nowhere near as hot as having pots of water on my stove. But I could avoid that altogether and just move it all outside and, you know, have it out there. And it's got a little spigot on it, which would make it easier to drain rather than trying to lift something that has, you know, 5 gallons of hot water in it. So, you know, there's a lot of selling features to it, but you don't need it. You don't need it. The thing that you do need, like I said, you've got to remember that you need to have space enough for at least an inch of water above your filled jars, but you also need to be sure that the jars are not sitting flat on the bottom of the pot. So there's a lot of DIY ways to do that. You know, if you had a big canner, a lot of times they have those racks that will lower all the jars down and keep them up off the bottom of the can. This pot has a rack in the bottom so that they're not sitting right on the bottom of the heating element. I have in the past cobbled together with like twist ties a bunch of these rings to make the little trivet in the bottom of your canner, just to keep them up off of the bottom surface. If you have a small cooling rack or any like a something from an Instant Pot, any kind of rack that will fit down onto the bottom of your pot and keep those jars off the bottom surface. It'll work. It'll work. I haven't seen these in the store lately, but I did a project for Ball a few years ago, and this was one of the things that they gave me. It's from their home canning discovery kit, and it's a little silicone basket. And it will take 3 pints or 4 jelly jars in like an 8-quart stock pot. Nice little size, not a big canning enterprise, but you know, you can lower them all down in there, process them, lift the whole thing out, very safe and secure. You know, it was a nice little thing, and I didn't have to have a great big, you know, canning pot to work with. So I'll mention that. Where's my, hold on. I'm missing a piece. Hold on, I got it. A canning funnel is definitely something that is really helpful. It fits over your jar to help you fill things without things spilling all over the side of the jar. Not necessary, but an inexpensive little thing, and it's kind of handy to have. Okay. So before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about jars. So I have my Your jars need to be washed and sterilized before you put any product in them. I'm going to say that again. They need to be washed and sanitized before you put any product in them. And I don't care if they're clean from whenever you put them away in, in the spring when you made whatever. They need to be washed and sanitized before you put anything in them. Wash them with hot soapy water. I am trying really hard to not have anything else on my stove. If you don't have a dishwasher, what you should do is have a hot kettle of water on the stove and keep your jars submerged and hot until you fill them. Now, I bypass all that by using my dishwasher. My dishwasher is 3 minutes away from finishing its cycle. So those jars are hot, clean, sterilized, and they're going to stay off my counter until I'm ready for one, which is like the best thing ever. So I would strongly recommend that you use your dishwasher if you have one. So they're going to be nice and hot and ready to go. So I'm going to get a couple of things set up here, and I want to show you. I'm going to move my camera down and kind of show you what I'm doing while I'm getting this stuff set up. Let's slide this down. Okay, there's the dog again. We are going to use wide mouth jars. So I've got a brand new package of wide mouth lids. Remember, we are not going to reuse these from the last time we can. Once I open a jar that's been sealed, I toss this. I am going to handle these as little as possible. I don't want to get my fingers, on the business part of this lid. It used to be that you were recommended to simmer these first, like to wash them and sterilize them kind of just like your jars. They've reformulated this so you don't have to do that anymore. But they do recommend that you put them in a little bit of just warm water so that they're not exposed to the elements in your kitchen and collecting debris or anything from the air. So I like to get them set up ahead of time so that they're easy to maneuver. If you just put a stack of these in like in the water to soak and be ready, they'll stick together, and it's too easy to pull one apart or to have 2 or 3 stick together at one time. So I like to kind of get myself all staged. So I put the lid in the ring together, and this is not hot water. It's just warm water from the tap. But you'll notice I'm trying really hard not to touch that white portion of the lid. I'm just going to get these down in here just so that they're standing by and ready for me. And with the tongs, it's going to make it real easy to just pick up one at a time and not have a duplicate. So I think that's all I'm going to have right now. All right, so I'm going to set those there, and I'm going to talk 1 minute about tomatoes. Come back to me. So when we talked earlier about there being high acid foods, tomatoes used to be considered all by themselves as a high acid food. Over the years, as tomatoes have been grown and varieties have been hybridized, and consumers have expressed their choice over what tomato they prefer in the store, and growers have decided what makes for a better keeper. All of these things have kind of morphed along to make the acidity of tomatoes really flexible and not truly known to the home consumer. In order to be sure that you have an acidity level sufficient to be safely canned in the home, we're going to do we're going to acidify them. And all we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of lemon juice. That's it. If you add excuse me. I'm going to turn a couple things off. If you add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice to a pint of tomatoes, it's guaranteed that it's got sufficient acidity. 2 tablespoons for a quart, because that's twice the volume. Now, it is recommended that you use commercially bottled lemon juice because it has a guaranteed acidity level. It's formulated. If you got all nice and fancy and fresh squeezed lemons, the lemons are almost as varied as tomatoes in their acidity level. So, you know, use the bottled stuff. It's the deal. It's the real deal. All right. Let me turn this off. So I am, because I've been putzing around here, I'm going to wash my hands one more time, and I'm going to grab a jar, and we're going to, I'm going to show you how we do this. So here's my hot jar out of the dishwasher. It is hot. And I've got my tomatoes here. These are just chopped, rough chopped. I didn't seed them. I didn't, all I did was remove the core and any blemishes, but that's what you see, just plain chopped tomatoes. I'm gonna throw them in this jar. I'm not putting, I'm already telling a lie. I was going to say I'm not putting anything else in there, but I'm going to put that tablespoon of lemon juice in there. Usually I like to put that at the bottom of the jar, but it doesn't matter. It's in there. Okay, so there's my lemon juice. Now I'm just going to pack these down. You see why I had those? I wanted to make sure my hands were clean because my hands are going all up in this jar. And I am taking these and I am just squishing them down in. It's making some nice little juice. It's compacting down there. I'm going to fill this jar. Now, before I do anything else, I want to make sure that I get rid of any air pockets in there. And I can see a couple on the side of the jar. I'm going to take a non-metal, I've got a little spatula. You could use a chopstick, a plastic knife, the handle to a spatula, whatever you want, just not metal. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to push it down on the side all the way to the bottom. And I'm going to kind of lean it. And I'm going to work around the side of the jar. And what that's doing is I'm kind of burping it. I'm releasing those little air pockets. And you'll see as I'm doing that the volume in the jar, you know, drops down. It's given me more room, but it's also getting rid of any of those air pockets, any places where, you know, that haven't been filled up. If you're doing something like pickles or green beans, you know, like dilly green beans or something, you want to be sure that you do this because you want to be sure that you've gotten, sometimes it's really surprising how much air is still in there. So I'm going to push them down again. And I think, yeah, I can't see any more air pockets. I have a paper towel. And I want to be sure that this top lip, that place where that rubber seal is going to make the seal, where they're going to meet, I want to make sure that it's free of debris. If I had a tomato seed on there, it would make it so that this wouldn't seal. It would just make it not work. So that's my jar. I've left a headspace to that first rim. This is where it gets really handy to just pull the lid in the ring at one time. And I just finger tight it. You notice it, I'm not, you know, muscling this thing down. I'm just trying to meet a little bit of resistance. I read something the other day. They said, well, if you're working on a towel, that as soon as you see the towel start to move, that's enough pressure. So, okay, that's good. So I'm going to move this off. And I'm also, while I put this in the canner, I had one going, another jar going for while we were talking. So I'm going to pull, and that one, the timer went off. So I'm going to pull that one out. And we can see if it gives you that telltale ping. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to try not to talk over it, but there's a little, and this is just an empty jar. There's a little dimple right there in the top. When that vacuum seal is formed and things are cool enough that it pulls it down, you hear it might not sound like that because this is an empty jar and it's kind of like beating a drum, but you can hear it, you can see it. You can see that little impression there. You can see it just kind of pull down. Now, it's important to let jars that are hot, let them set and cool. Don't be jostling them around. Don't go over to the jar and go, are you sealed? Are you sealed? You know, pressy, pressy, pressy. But, you know, let them just sit and think about being sealed. Sometimes they will pop and seal as soon as they come out of the canner. Sometimes they wait until, 10 o'clock at night. You can be in the other room and all of a sudden, ping, and you hear one, so there's not real rhyme or reason to it. But I'm going to set this one over to the side. See, I had a little bit of tomato leakage over there, but that's okay. It kind of seeped through. One thing you'll notice, I put this towel down. This, again, is a screaming hot jar. I don't want to put that hot jar onto a cold counter or I have a cookie tray under here that makes it a little easier to move things around. It's always good to have a towel or two down. It helps prevent that thermal shock. Hot jar makes cold counter and you have a crack. So it also helps, keep your counter a little cleaner. So it's really helpful to have that down, and it's easier to wash a towel. I'm going to grab another jar and we'll do another one. This time I'm going to remember to put the lemon juice at the bottom. And I'm going to do the same thing. Smash it full of tomatoes. And one thing that you might be tempted to do is to get all your jars lined up, assembly line. I'm going to be super efficient. I'm going to have 10 jars lined up here, and I'm going to do, this all at once, rather than me pulling, one jar at a time out of the dishwasher. I'll tell you why that's not advisable. For one thing, your jars are going to cool off. It's better to fill a hot jar. But the other thing is, if you have 10 jars sitting here open to whatever's floating around in your kitchen, or, did you hear it?
Yes.
It just sealed.
Oh, I'm saying yes for everybody. I hope you heard it. It's the most beautiful sound in the world.
It's a wonderful, wonderful sound. It makes my heart sing. That's a silly thing to say, but it truly does. You don't want 10 open jars. They could be hanging out for 20, 30 minutes while you're filling them. You don't want them open to the air. You want to hurry up and get those sterilized jars filled with stuff as quickly as you can, and get a lid on them and get them in the canner, and then go to the next one. So, try to resist that urge to be, ergonomic and assembly line, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there's another one. I'm going to throw that in the canner. And I am going to just kind of keep working on this, but I think I'm probably going to do maybe 3 more jars, but it's a good time to entertain questions if there are questions.
So this is Carolyn. I believe I allowed you all to unmute yourselves. So if you want to try to unmute yourself and ask a question, that would be great, or you can put a question in the chat. Okay, so now I think I did it. So sorry.
I have a question. If you have water, just a drop of water on the rim, would that prevent it from making a seal? I know you said, Kathy, a tomato seed, but if it was just water, would that prevent it?
Kathy, you're muted and I apologize. I can't unmute you. Okay. And you're still muted, Kathy, sorry.
Oh,
There you go.
Sorry about that.
No, that was my fault.
Water will not, a bead of water on there is not going to hurt it at all. It will not interfere with the seal one way or the other. It's mostly like if you have a stream of juice or a tomato seed, piece of skin, stuff like that. This jar I overfilled a little bit, and I'm just going to pull a piece out to make sure that I have, actually I'm pull 2 pieces out to make sure that I have enough head space. And take my paper towel. And this is definitely not the time for you to wear a white linen top in the kitchen because you're going to have things squirting.
So Kathy, when you're trying to get the air pockets out, is that that's to make more space in the jar? But if you miss one, it's not going to cause any bacterial problems, is it?
Right. You have a greater chance of success by getting rid of those air pockets, making sure that everything out of there, all the air pockets are eliminated. You might come back after they've been processed and see that you still have an air pocket or 2. They should be fine. But it's more often it's to make sure that you get the jar full,
Yeah.
So let's see, I think I'm going to get 2, this one and maybe one more jar, and then I will start the canner. One of the things you will see in any recipe will tell you how long to process for. So I'm putting these in the canner, and then the canner was boiling. It is still pretty hot, but it's not full boiling. And I'm putting these jars in there that are going to drop the temperature just a little bit. So I am not going to start timing until the water in the canner is back to a full rolling boil. And for pints of tomatoes, 40 minutes is the optimal length of time. So I will turn it on to boil, but I'm not going to start that 40-minute timer until we're at a full rolling boil. And do yourself a favor, start getting your water heated while you're doing this part, because it takes a good while for that water to come up to temperature. Let me see, I got one more jar. Did I do let's see. I'm looking to see if I have another pint, wide mouth pint. Sorry, hold on.
Hey, Kathy, while you're looking, I have a question.
Sure.
So you just put that lemon juice either in the top or the bottom. Like I would have thought you would have had to have mixed it with the tomatoes. How does that take care?
No, it's now keep in mind that while this is in the canner, it's going to be boiling. So the contents and the juices are, you know, it's mixing up. It's doing its thing in the canner.
Gotcha.
Not a problem. You don't need to add any salt or seasoning, sugar or anything. None of those. The only thing, those things have no preservative value in home canning. They're purely for flavor. So I don't salt. I don't put any seasonings in here. It's just tomatoes. And you won't, you could use, instead of lemon juice, if you had citric acid, you could use citric acid to do the same thing. And that is typically what they will use in commercial applications to do the acidification. But it's a little harder to come by than lemon juice, so I usually just use lemon juice. All right, so here's my last one. And it was pretty good. I got still some juice and stuff in there. I'll throw that in something later. But so I'm going to put this in the canner, and I'll show you with my phone what it all looks like. Do you have me spotlighted? Okay.
I did, yes.
So there's a rack at the bottom of the canner, and I've got 5 pints of tomatoes in there. They're setting on top of the rack, and I'm going to put the lid on it, and I'm going to crank the temperature up. And once it hits, I got to get to the dial here. I have too many pots in the way. Sorry. Let me get rid of this guy. And as soon as it is up to a full rolling boil, I will start my timer. But that's the hard part. Just a couple of little follow-up things I'll tell you. Let's see. We talked about what you would do with jars that don't seal. Obviously, like I said, it's not shelf stable. There's nothing wrong with that product. You know, use it within a few days, but stick it in the fridge until you do use it. Now, after the jars have cooled, and what I like to do, and I kind of half showed you this earlier, I like to have, I have a rimmed cookie sheet, a solid cookie sheet here to work on. When I bring these out of the canner, I'm going to set them all on this towel so that they don't have any of that thermal shock coming from the boiling water bath onto this cold counter, the cold tray. That's that little bit of insulation. But the other nice thing about that is then I have a tray full that I can just shift over into the dining room and let them finish cooling. And then, I listen to them ping through the course of the night. But having a nice rim tray and a couple of old towels nearby will really be a help for you. Once they come out of the canner, let me grab another jar real quick. I want to show you something. All right, so these are tomatoes that I did a month ago. Same process. You'll see there's a little separation. There's liquid here at the bottom, perfectly normal. Tomatoes are going to vary in their air content, moisture content, their density. So, I shoved them in the jar just like you saw me do this time. And you can still see headspace up above, but these are fine. You'll notice I took the band off. The bands are, the rings are in place. You put those on to keep that lid in place while that seal forms. That ring has fulfilled its purpose, and you can take that ring off. If there was any kind of debris or stickiness in there, you could wipe them down. And you can store it just like this. You should not stack other jars on top. They should, you know, if you have a shelf in between them, or a, you know, cardboard or a rack or something in between them, but you don't want this lid to be bearing the weight of anything above it. Best to store in a coolish, darkish place. Best to be consumed within a year. I have things on my canning shelf that I know I canned, I grew, I have every confidence in, you know, eating them 2 or 3 years down the road. Sometimes the quality might suffer a little bit. Tomatoes might darken a little bit, but I feel confident about eating them. Now, if I were to go downstairs and find that this seal has been broken, that little nubby thing is popped up, or the lid just lips right off, or things smell bad, or something is oozing, oh, no. He's bye-bye. He goes somewhere far away. Don't take any chances with it. But, you know, when you go to the grocery store and you open, you know, a jar of something, and you hear that, you pop the seal, you know that it's got a decent seal on them. It's fine. Label them. Label with a date. Like, I can obviously see that that's tomatoes. I know it's tomatoes, but I want to know that I'm using the oldest stuff first. I want to make sure that my stock is rotated. If I come across a jar that maybe I missed, that I canned in 2009, I'm going to say goodbye to it. And, you know, that's happened. And you'd be surprised if you think, oh, I'm going to know that that's applesauce or apple butter. You know, you come back to it 6 months later and you go, I don't know what that is. It is really helpful to make sure that you can make cute little labels if you really are into it. But as long as you've got, you know, something identifying the contents and the date that you put it up, is advisable. My preference with tomatoes is that I don't want to spend a whole lot of time making fancy sauce or salsa in August. I want to get those tomatoes in a jar. One of the really nice things about using a wide mouth jar is that if I decide I want to put that in a soup, but I don't necessarily want it all that chunky, I can take an immersion blender. I can open this up, take an immersion blender, whir it up, and then throw it in, and look, I've got, you know, pureed tomatoes instead of chunks. So it's very, very handy. Trying to think if there's anything else that I missed or any other questions.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So for example, if I've made peach jam before, it's been a while, so I have to remember, but adding sugar to any recipe, does that mess with the acidity?
It does not.
Okay.
It does not. Like, it's going to impact whether or not that gels, whether it sets, you know, that chemistry happens, but it doesn't have anything to do with the acidity or the preservation of the product that you're putting in there.
Great. His friend of mine made me some really excellent salsa. So, you know, took the tomatoes, did all the stuff and everything. And that was a question that she had was, you know, she put a teeny bit of sugar in there and she was wondering if that changed it.
No, it doesn't change anything.
It was delicious.
A couple of quick things that I'll mention. Let's see. If you decide that you are interested in, you know, exploring the world of canning and making your own stuff and, you know, having fun with all this stuff. Well, wait a minute, let me back up a minute. Suppose you want to, do you all know how to peel tomatoes? I don't like to assume anything, but in order to peel tomatoes, what you do is you get a pot of water on the stove, you put them in boiling water for about 90 seconds, and they've got to be ripe for this to work, but you put them in for about 90 seconds, blanch them, and then you put them into cold water. And what that does is it makes the peels easy to kind of slip off. If they're good and ripe, it's easy enough to peel, and then you have removed the peel entirely, and then you can chop or can them whole, or whatever you want. My hesitation with that is like, that's another pot on the stove. It becomes one more. It's almost like there's just hot water everywhere, and it's one more thing. It's one more thing to juggle, and then you got tomatoes over here, and this to me is like the simplest way to get them in jars. If you find that to be objectionable, or you want to avoid the seeds and the peels for whatever reason, by all means, peel them, spend some time squishing out some of the extra juice and the seeds, and you'll come up with this beautiful, your tomatoes won't have as much of the other stuff in there, but I don't find that objectionable, so that's the way we go. The other thing that I'll mention, and this will work for most vegetables, if you're doing applesauce, if you wanted to make your own ketchup, tomato puree is really pretty nice. A food mill. I don't know if you're familiar with these or not. This is a bit old and tomato stained, but essentially what happens once you have to start with tomatoes that have been cooked, softened a little bit. So you core them, cut them up, peels, everything, and throw them in a stock pot to heat them through so that they've started to release some of their juice and softened up. Then you load them into this guy, pretty simple little gadget, but it has a screen and this plunger, and it's pushing the pulp through. You put it over the top of a saucepan or a bowl to collect the stuff that you want underneath, and the peels and the skins will stay on the top. And you'll end up with these dry peels that have almost no tomato flesh left to them at all, and puree that's nice and silky smooth. And same with apples, any kind of fruit that you wanted to do that way. It's a little time consuming, but I can do that when I get to my tomatoes in February. I can dump this in and run them through the food mill then. I did just notice that my canner is boiling, so I'm going to start my timer on that. And we're not going to hang around long enough for that to process, but I just want to make sure that I don't lose track of time. So I'm setting it for 35 minutes, and when that timer goes off, I'm going to pull them off and put them on this towel line cookie sheet to cool. Sorry about that. Other questions?
Anybody, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat. Maria?
I'm curious, Kathy, as to all the things that you've canned, or most of them anyway.
I missed the beginning of that question.
I'm curious to know what types of things besides tomatoes that you've canned.
Oh, okay. Well, I always do applesauce and apple butter, September and October, which I dearly love. In the last couple of weeks, I've done 4 different varieties of peach jam and peach barbecue sauce. Peach barbecue sauce is really pretty amazing. I have done some pickles. I am not, either I haven't found the right recipe. We are not real pickle people. I don't find pickles to be worth the time and the effort. And I've had enough tasting pickles that, didn't light anybody's fire, that I don't feel like it's worth the time. I do an awesome peach chutney, hot dog relish, corn relish. My favorite things to do tend to be interesting recipes because I do them in nice little jars, and that's pretty much Christmas presents. So I put all this time in, and I make cute little labels for everything. And if I go, you know, in the days when we used to be able to go visit people at the holidays, you know, I'd make a little basket of a couple of special jams, and they're really, really good. I will tell you tonight, because I had the canner out and I kind of was in canning mode, there are two things started on the stove, and I'll finish those tonight. One is Bloody Mary mix, which I've never made before, but I'm pretty excited about that. You know, the jury's out. We'll see what that's, you know, how that goes over. And the other one is a plum sauce, like you would get on mushu pork, you know, a kind of spicy plums, vinegar, onions, garlic. It's got a really complex looking flavor. It's smelling really good. But both of those are new recipes for me. So those are some of my favorites. I see what size is the canning pot. This device that I got is 21 quarts. And I think it's pretty much the same size as the vintage aluminum canner that I used to have. If I were filling that with quart jars, it would accommodate 7 quarts at a time. I think pint jars, it will take 8. And if you're doing like little jelly jars, you don't want to stack them in there. Sometimes it's tempting to do that. I would just want to process them all one time. You don't want to stack them while they're processing. And I will say this, the pandemic has affected supply lines for canning supplies like it's like the new toilet paper and yeast. They're hard to come by. I have a good supply of jars because I keep those through the years. I have a good supply of the rings because, you know, they seem to multiply. But those canning lids were almost impossible to come by last year. And this year, but I haven't looked this year because I bought a bulk order last year. So I'm kind of guarding that supply with all that I know. Carolyn, did you I forgot to tell you, did you put there you go, you got that link in the chat. It's to a Google Doc. And what I did was I linked to the Ball website, which is freshpreserving.com. And you can't purchase supplies direct from the website. They rely on you going to different retailers, but they'll help steer you toward suppliers, retail outlets where you can buy that stuff. But great resource, lots of really good recipes. The extension service listing has a couple of pretty straightforward canning guides. We'll tell you a couple of those PDFs that I linked on there give you a couple of nice charts, like here's the low acid stuff, here's the high acid, so that you can know from a glance what you need, how you can process them. The recipe will tell you process in a water bath canner or process at pressure in a pressure canner. So take those instructions to heart. That's where the way they are intended to be processed.
Speaking of recipes, Kathy, someone said they would love the recipe for your peach barbecue sauce.
That is on the Fresh Preserving website. I think it's called Zesty Peach Barbecue Sauce, but I know it's on that website. And there is a good search feature on that if you go to freshpreserving.com, and if you put peach in the search bar, I'm certain that it comes up.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the University of Georgia Co-op Extension is a wonderful source too, I guess. So easy to
it's not as it's not as colorful and commercial, but it's solid information. It's a reliable source. You got anything else in the chat?
I don't see any. Well, you make it look so easy
got
and
one
you're a good
question about-
teacher. Go ahead.
Jams, they don't use pectin and wax anymore, right? They used to
No.
use that 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, my mother used to do that. And Carolyn, have you ever heard of that with
Yes.
paraffin wax sealing?
Yes.
That was how my mother used to always seal jars. They don't advise it anymore. They used to just say you could fill a jelly jar with hot stuff and put the lid on it and then turn it upside down. There are a lot of things that they say you used to do. You used to be able to do. They're just not tested as safe anymore. I think people were really lucky for years. And sometimes people did get sick, doing those kinds of things. But, it's kind of like, as science has evolved, as research has evolved, we know more, so we do better. And that's the ultimate lesson. I was going to show you, this is a little jelly jar, 8 ounces. So you have a concept of size. You get really good at measurements in your head and volumes, 4 ounces, 8 ounces, 16 ounces. I don't have a quart jar here, but 32 ounces. But it doesn't make sense to make a quart jar of grape jelly if you want to try to give that out, or you give it away as gifts, or just use a little bit at a time. Use the appropriate size jar. Another good point is that when your recipe will tell you what size jar to use, and you can always go to a smaller size jar, but if it tells you to can it in pints, you can't assume that it's okay to go into quart jars. There are differences in density and how quickly things heat, how thoroughly they heat through. So you can always scale it down, but scaling to the next size up jar is questionable. What else you got?
Well, I have to say that I've made some pickles where people, and it was so easy, just buy this dill mix at
Yep.
what's the place, Southern States or whatever, Mrs. Somebody's something or other. And it's
Probably.
yes. And they were just so crisp, and I just could not keep enough jars of those. So and when pickling cucumbers were coming in, oh my gosh, I was grateful because my neighbors were done. They were like, I'm not going to eat another one of those.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of those, I tend to not go for like those mixes, but I will say this about pickle mixes, that they have included in that mix, it's a pickle crisp, is what Ball calls it. And I can't remember what it chemically is. It's nothing to be frightened about. And I just can't remember what the compound is, but it is intended to keep those pickles nice and crisp. And I think that's what I've probably been missing most times when I've done pickle recipes, is they just, I do refrigerator pickles. I'll, throw them together real quickly with a brine and throw them in the fridge, and we eat them within a month or two. So, and it's way less work, and I can kind of keep up with the cukes as they're coming out of the garden. So I pick my battles. Pickles aren't in it.
Do you, so somebody mentioned pectin, but so I've used something called Pomona's pectin to keep down the amount of sugar that you need to add to jams, because a lot of the recipes have a high sugar content. So can you speak to that?
Yeah. So pectin is thickener. Now, apples. It's found in almost every, I think, every fruit. But it is what combines with the sugar and over the cooking process will thicken things. You need to use a pectin that is labeled low sugar in order to cut back the sugar in a recipe. So if you're just using regular pectin off the shelf, you should follow the recipe for how much sugar it says. It says is required in that recipe. If you're concerned about sugar and want to make a low sugar variety, there are quite a few, actually some low sugar recipes on the Ball site, which I think are really good. I had a thought that jumped the track here for a minute. Oh, you can make pretty much any jam without pectin if you prefer. And pectin is not the boogeyman. There's nothing bad about it. It's not even really considered a cheat. Okay. I think sometimes people think about pectin as, you know, the cheater's way to a jam. That's not even true. I tend to make, when I make jam just with sugar and fruit, it takes a longer cooking time to get to that gel stage. Adding the pectin will make it a little more guaranteed that you're going to have a good gel set. There's always a little bit of a crapshoot. Like I said, the difference between, you know, was it sundae topping or strawberry jam? Who knows? Growing up, we had all kinds of jars on the canning shelf. You know, ice cream sundae topping. All right, yay, mom! But that jam didn't set.
Yeah, and it even if you follow the recipe to the same exact everything, it doesn't always turn out the same way.
It doesn't always turn out. And I mean, a jam or jelly thermometer is a good thing because it will, you have to get your recipe to a certain temperature in order to dissolve the sugar, make it that chemical reaction happen, make some of that liquid evaporate so that you're going to get to a gel stage. And, you know, you can test that with a spoon or on a cold plate, you know, to chill it and see what the consistency is like, or you can bring it to the temperature that's suggested in the recipe itself with a jam and jelly thermometer. My mother was a great jam and jelly maker. She made a lot of it, and we must have eaten a lot of it as kids because it was what she did all the time. But like I said, every now and then you get one that just doesn't set. But doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's just you got to figure out what you're gonna do with it. You're gonna get a little creative.
Pancake syrup.
Absolutely. I had somebody tell me the other day they made hot pepper jelly and it just didn't set, and it turned out that she goofed on the recipe and didn't measure something right. And she was like, you know, it's still pretty tasty. So she was using it on fried tofu and all kinds of, and it was like, I bet it was amazing, but it wasn't pepper jelly anymore.
I can see the steam from the pot. Can we look at the pot again?
Sure.
I'll get your camera.
You know, let's see, do I still have it connected? Yes, I do.
Okay, hold, I'll find it. Hold, please. Where is your phone, Kathy?
So it's, you know, it's boiling away. It's got a couple of, this particular pot has a couple of steam vents on it. So you're seeing the steam escape, but it really is less heat than, you know, having it on top of the stove.
So I forget what you said. What do you have it on then if you don't have it on the stove?
It's a self-contained, let's see if I can get this down here. It's called, it's an electric water bath canner. So if you can imagine, like, it's a huge, almost like a huge crock pot. There's a base. separates from this base, and there's a big element down here. And it's a little hard to see because of the way I've got things kind of swirled around here. But there's a temperature dial, and it'll tell you, crank it all the way to the end, to the max, so that you can get things boiling. So it's, instead of having it on a burner on the stove, have it here on the counter.
Thank you.
And so this thing was not inexpensive, but if you can find a canning pot, like those enameled, speckled enamelware pots. I mean, they're not anything special. They're not, super high tech. If you can find them, they're, maybe they run $30 or $40. Not even sure. I haven't priced them in ages, but a lot of times they will come, the pot, the rack, the whole outfit, and you can use them on top of your stove. They work just fine. Again, a stock pot, as long as your jars will fit in there with a little bumped up from the bottom of the pot, and make sure that you have at least an inch of water at the top. And if your stock pot is big enough to accommodate that, it'll work. This one here, this has got the Bloody Mary mix in there. I got to do the next step with that. But I've used that one before to can in. I've put just a little cooling rack at the bottom, and because it's nice and deep, I can put quart jars in there just fine.
So we can come to the center tomorrow and get a sample of the blood. Yes.
I don't think that was part of this, but
Well, first of all, the jury is out on how delicious this Bloody Mary mix is going to be. I was intrigued by it because I like a good Bloody Mary mix, and we're going to, the tomatoes were looking good, so we're going to try it. It might be the next best thing. It might be, I'm going to turn it into soup. I don't know. But I mean, it's tomatoes and peppers, celery, carrots, parsley, onion, garlic, and I've got to add a couple of spices to it. But how bad could it be, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, this class was, you were a great presenter. I mean, you're so nice.
Thank you.
This was wonderful.
Thank you. I hope you learned something. I hope you will take the step to try it, and you might get hooked. You might decide this is way more work than you want to get into. But I grew up with gardeners and in farm country in upstate New York, and a home economics major for a mother. And we didn't have a whole lot growing up, but we had a lot coming out of the garden, and she was determined not to waste any of it. But I also have friends of mine who have significant allergies and dietary concerns that do a lot of this specifically for, having control over what is in the food that they're eating. So, there's a lot of reasons to do it. And it's not that difficult.
And I noticed, Cynthia, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks. I just, by the way, I looked up the steamer that you use, and there's one made by Ball, and it's the 21 quart. It's only $52. It's not that expensive, but it comes with your rack, and it says it uses 20% less energy than stovetop. So that's another good reason.
I'm curious where you found it for that. Is it in stock?
Well, let's see. It says Fresh Tech. I don't know. Let's see. It's NEYDSEA.com.
Yeah, maybe.
So, and I'll have to go look and see what the next one was.
Yeah. I can tell you that I paid significantly more for this one, but maybe it's used, maybe it's coming direct from, I don't know.
Here's another one for
$100. The prices are all over the board.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I have done I used to, for teachers' gifts, make cranberry applesauce, and some of the thank you notes for that were worth the hot day in the kitchen. I mean, really, people so appreciate something canned. They really do. So it's a wonderful thing to do for gifts too.
I have a nephew who just graduated from high school, but I never knew what to get him for Christmas, except he loves peach chutney. He absolutely loves it. He puts it on everything. I gave him one year a case of peach chutney. I was his favorite. It was like, for a 9-year-old kid was like, oh, it was the best thing ever. Okay, whatever.
How about you, Lisa? I noticed you're unmuted. Did you want to say anything?
Oh no, just that it's wonderful and you're a fantastic teacher. And
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Like I said, I've taught a few classes before. I enjoy. I really enjoy doing it, and sharing encouraging other people to explore it is fun too. So don't be cowed by it. As you can see, it's not rocket science. You just keep a few basic principles in mind and, start small. If you decide that you ever want to get into pressure canning kind of takes you to the next level. I can tell you that I've canned venison before, soups, chilies, it opens up a big variety of products if you wanted to get into that, but don't start there. Start with a simple water bath.
Canning deer. That'll be our next presentation.
Gross.
I'm going to tell you, it's grass-fed, locally raised, antibiotic-free. If I have a hunter friend that brings me a bunch of venison, and I can it for him in exchange. He gets a few jars, and I get it on the shelf. And you would never know that it wasn't wonderful stew beef. It's really, really good.